Well, joining me for more perspectives to the just concluded off-cycle elections is the managing editor, Avalon Daily, Ayodele Adio. Glad to have you join us on the news this hour.
Thank you for having me.
Well, the president has congratulated the winners of the election, which is somewhat a form of acknowledgement to how the process actually went. But INEC at some point acknowledged that there have been some sort of attempt, that there was some sort of attempt to actually manipulate the election. And this is why it was rescheduled in some areas. And we cannot also ignore a few reports of vote buying. Going forward, what should INEC have done better?
You see, to be honest, before I speak to what INEC could and can do better, I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that INEC has improved in terms of technology over the last few years and has done credible things to improve the integrity of our elections. But unfortunately, our politicians and security agencies who are also part of elections have decided to stay in medieval times and have not improved in terms of character, and outlook in their preparation towards elections. So while INEC, continues to strive to improve the electoral process, despite a lot of hitches, it would appear that politicians still want to play the same old games, deploying violence, thuggery, malpractices, and all sorts of shenanigans, during elections. And at the end of the day, it would appear that INEC would always carry the can. But I think it's important that we begin to place culpability, even on the hands of politicians who continue to try to sabotage our electoral process. And I think that's an important point to make before I also speak to the fact that INEC itself has to also do a lot more to improve the integrity of its processes. What happened in a few states, especially in Kogi and in Imo State, was that there were certain polling units where results were already prepared, before elections even began. But thankfully, INEC itself owned up to that huge, terrible mishap and decided to cancel elections in those polling units and acknowledge, those mistakes. So what needs to happen is the way that INEC recruits ad hoc staff perhaps needs to go through a lot more rigorous process so that we have people manning elections at polling units and at local governments who have the interest of the country at heart and not people who work for politicians or who are cronies of politicians, at local governments and at these various polling units, because these kinds of things will continue to happen where you would wake up in polling units and electoral officers who are employed at that particular level will sabotage the elections, even without the knowing of the senior officers in Abuja. So I think they have to take recruitment more seriously, and they have to also take public engagement a lot more seriously. Because at the end of the day, if people lose confidence in the electoral process, if people lose confidence in INEC, the alternative is a situation where chaos will thrive. And we do not want to see that kind of situation in our nascent democracy.
Well, still on the conduct of INEC during the elections, Yaga Africa, an election monitoring group, was also quoted to have said that the November 11 elections were a missed opportunity for INEC to actually rebuild trust and confidence in Nigeria's electoral process. Also, recently, we had the Social Democratic Party candidate, Murtala Ajaka, just before backtracking on his decision of not going to court. It was quoted to have said that challenging the governorship election in this state, in Kogi State, is a waste of time. Where do we go from here? Like, doesn't this infer the gradual loss of hope in free and fair institutions and a dent on our democracy?
I agree with you 100%. And I think it's important to stress these 2 points. The first is that once the average Nigerian completely loses hope in our electoral system, the situation that follows is that they retreat from participating in democratic processes. They retreat from participating in elections, and that makes the alternative the alternative to democracies become a lot more exciting to a lot of Nigerians. And that is a dangerous trend that we must never allow to happen. Because once people lose hope in the ballot to change their leaders, it means that you're suggesting to them that violent alternatives becomes a credible option. And that must be strongly discouraged. And that can only be discouraged if the Electoral Commission continues to improve on the integrity of the process. The second, of course, is that politicians cannot continue to turn our elections into a carnival of violence, where they continue to deploy thugs to disrupt votings across polling units, where they think that they are incapable of competing. You mentioned Yaga. Yaga report states that in 21% of the polling units in Imo and in 14% of the polling units in Kogi, there were clear voter intimidation and clear demonstration of violence and the subjugation of the rights of people to go out to vote. In clear terms, that would mean that at least close to 200,000 electorates had seen violence, had been intimidated at their various polling units, which is completely unacceptable. The third point that I would like to make is the idea that our elections or the integrity of our elections lies squarely on the office of the Electoral Commission, which is INEC. Because everybody continues to conveniently blame INEC when every actor or other actors in the electoral process are complicit. The people who deploy violence, what is INEC going to do in a situation where they do not control the police or do not have the constitutional powers to order the police? The people who deploy voter buying across polling units. The INEC also does not have the powers. Of course, the EFCC plays a supporting role, but they cannot on their own stop people from vote buying. There is another agency responsible for deterring that. So if you look at our entire ecosystem outside INEC's involvement, you will see that there is a lot of evolving that needs to happen, for our electoral system to improve. And it cannot 100% reliant on INEC. Listen, INEC has its faults. And you and I know that I've discussed this severally on your platforms.
Yes.
And I've been INEC to account. But I think we need to move away from INEC and begin to hold politicians and other actors culpable for their misdeeds and misdemeanor in our elections.
Wow, we understand that elections is a multi-stakeholder responsibility, and every party have their role to play in making sure that we have a free and fair process. Well, Ayodele Adio, Managing Editor, Avalon Daily, thank you so much for joining us on the News at 1.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.